Good morning and welcome to Maranatha Baptist Church for our morning Bible study. We will be in Genesis chapter 12 this morning. We are continuing our study in the promises of God. And last week we looked at the promise of the promise made to Noah, in the Abrahamic covenant or the Noahic covenant. I'm all mixed up this morning. Hopefully we'll get this right. This morning we're looking at the Abrahamic covenant that God made, and we're going to veer a little bit off topic in our Bible study. As I've mentioned many times before, good material in our curriculum. They give you a lot of leeway to go in various directions, and so this morning we're going to go in various directions. This is our men's Bible study, but it's pertinent for men or ladies. Looking at these men in particular who are given these, not titles, but descriptors of who they are. And it's remarkable when you consider what was part of their lives, that God would choose to record forever this descriptor of these men. And I hope to make this clearer when we get into it. But let's start in Genesis chapter 12, the Abrahamic covenant. Now, how many covenants do you know of in the Bible? Promises.
3 maybe, but there's one to Adam.
Okay.
One to Moses.
Okay.
And Abraham.
Okay.
Are the three that come to my mind, Old Testament wise.
Okay. There's a couple more. Last week we looked at a flood and a rainbow. Noah. So we're not going to get nitpicky here because we could look this up, Google it, we could read books, and we would find there's somewhere between 5 and 7 or 7, 8-ish in there. That's not the point of this study, nor is it the point of what we're going to talk about this morning. The point being, let's nitpick how many covenants there are. The point is God's made promises. That's the point of this whole study. And we're looking at the promises God has made. And can you rely on them is the key thing. And the other thing about covenants that's important, is it a conditional covenant? A conditional means somehow dependent on me in relationship to God. Why do I say that conditional? Because is God ever going to let me down or not fulfill his end of the deal? No. So when I say it's conditioned on something, it's never conditioned on God. It's always conditioned on me or the person or people God's speaking to at the time. All right? So I know in a conditional covenant, there's some responsibility placed on me. In an unconditional covenant, there's no responsibility placed on me. God is going to fulfill it all. Now, of the two options, conditional or non-conditional, which one should every human being desire? The unconditional. The unconditional covenant. God in Jeremiah, I'm going to make a new covenant with you. I'm going to write these laws on your heart. I'm not going to leave it to you to get these laws in. I'm not going to leave it to you to change you. I'm going to do it. And I think if we presented that to people just that way, what would you rather have, a non-conditional or conditional covenant? Most people would choose non when you would ask them. But in reality, the majority of people are choosing a conditional covenant. How do I know that? Because when you ask them, are you going to heaven, what is their response for the average person? Am I a good person? Is that conditional or non-conditional? That's conditional. Don't you know there's a better covenant out there, not conditional? Wouldn't you rather trust in God fulfilling his promises than you? Grace. Yeah, like grace. Not the law, but yet the majority of people in this world are living under a conditional promise or covenant. They're living under what we would call, most likely, the Mosaic covenant. And I'm sure we're going to get to this in the future. The Mosaic covenant is this: if you do what I say, you'll be my people, and I will be your what? Your God. I will be your God. And that's how most people are living today. And unfortunately and surprisingly, even many people who call themselves Christians are living under the Mosaic covenant in all reality. They're trying to keep some law or some ritual. And Hebrews is so very, very clear. Hebrews and Galatians, if there's questions about the sufficiency or the significance of Jesus Christ, Galatians and Hebrews clearly answered those questions. And we find that Jesus Christ is more than enough. He's the great high priest. His covenant is everlasting. It's made out of better promises and conditions. It certainly is, because it leaves nothing to me and puts everything on him, and he fulfilled it all. So that's the great thing about promises. But backing up into our study, we're in Genesis chapter 12, verse 1 through 3. I'll read that as you guys follow along. Now the Lord had said to Abram, "Get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred and from thy father's house unto a land that I will show thee. And I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee. And in thee all families of the earth shall be blessed." Wow. What's some surprising things in just those 3 verses there? What some amazing things here?
That all families of the earth shall be blessed.
Yeah, that's amazing.
That's the biggest, I think, that's broad.
That's really broad. Making a great nation. Now, I don't know where Abraham's coming from. I don't know if he was rich over in Ur of the Chaldees. I don't know if he came from a significant family. My inclination is he didn't, but he could have, because it doesn't really appear that God uses major influential people in the Bible. Usually he uses the weak and the unheard of and makes them strong. But I don't know what Abraham's condition was. And really, I guess bottom line, it doesn't matter. What if I were to get that direction from God? And number one, how did Abraham know it was God? He's coming from a pagan place. How did he know this was the one true God?
It's funny you say that. I've had opinions about Abraham, but I can't back them up. So you can help me on this. One, I feel like Abraham had money. And I say that because it was implied that he had. I just don't think it meant anything to him. Most people that have money, that's where they put their faith. That's where they're relying on that for everything. And Abraham sought after God. He knew that there was a God, a one true God, and sought after him. And one remarkable thing there is, all the families on earth are going to be blessed, but you get away from your dad, get away from your family, get away from everybody, and go.
Yeah.
And I've always thought of that as your family influences you.
Tremendously.
And sometimes, unfortunately, you're better off being away from that influence. It's just a reality. For you to do the right thing, you need to leave there's influences you can't be around.
110% agree. So they call Abraham the father of faith. And what event and we're not going to get to it today, but what event do we all know about in Abraham's life that they normally attach to him doing that? With Isaac. But truly, for me, it would begin right here.
It really would. I mean, To leave everything, to leave your protection. This ain't America.
No,
This is where other people come and took all your stuff.
exactly.
And your wife and your kids and everything, I mean,
The whole kit and caboodle.
yeah, and killed you.
Yes.
Yeah, this isn't, your family was protection. Where he lived,
It was everything, your family.
yes.
Your whole status in life would be dependent on your family, how big it was, how many offspring you had, the whole 9 yards would all be, you would be looking, basically he's saying, give me your life, because he's leaving everything that would have sustained his life. He's leaving it. And being brought up in a pagan atmosphere, society, and knowing that this was the one true God. We know from the study we did a couple years ago about God in all the world. It's not like he was just in one spot because of what happened at the Tower of Babel and after Noah. People dispersed and brought understanding of things with them wherever they went. So we know that. But for him to leave everything, all that security, and go somewhere, a totally different place, God doesn't say where he's taking them. He's just saying, I'm taking you somewhere. You don't know where, but I'm taking you there.
Well, you didn't exactly follow it either.
Well, and that's going to be the second part of what I'm going to bring up here in a few moments. We look at how God gives these guys these descriptors, but we look at their whole lives and we think, Abraham, the father of faith, so let's just work with that one. But what do you and I know about this guy who's the father of faith? He's given that title, but what do we know about him?
There were times where he didn't have the faith that we want to associate with him. Perhaps.
Yeah, there were times where Abraham was far from faithful. What were a couple of those times? There's two biggies that
Well, one, he took Lot with him.
took Lot with him. Okay,
And, because it would,
yeah,
in the end, he ended up taking somebody with him. The next big one I think of is with his wife in Egypt.
okay. His wife in Egypt, that's one of the biggies I'm thinking of. Remember, there was a famine. God didn't tell him to go down to Egypt. He took her down there, and she was a beautiful lady, whatever that means. And he said, hey, listen, when we get down to Egypt, tell them you're my sister. Don't tell them you're my wife, because, as Bob was already mentioned, in that time and era, you just knocked the guy off. If you wanted something, you went and took it. And especially he was going to be a foreigner in Egypt. He would have, I'm assuming, he would have absolutely no rights, no privileges. Whatever would happen to him, so be it. He's a foreigner. So he gets down there and he lies, and if it weren't for the grace of God intervening, there'd have been, God would have done this again another way. But by the grace of God, it worked out. What's the other one? The other biggie? Kind of a collusion with him and his wife, but nonetheless showing no faith. Ishmael. Yeah. God says, you're going to have a baby. Well, first of all.
You had to give me the clue, by the way.
Yeah. First of all, Abraham, when God says, you're going to have a child, he's like, is it this governor of mine, that my number one man who oversees my affair? Is it this guy? And God said to Abraham, no, it's not that guy. Your offspring's coming from you. It's going to be from you physically. And so God tells him that, oh, okay, so me physically, but not Sarah physically. We'll just transfer Sarah's responsibility to Hagar. That must be how God's going to work it out. So they do that. And we know Ishmael comes out, and God's like, no, that's not how we're doing that. Let me be clear. It's coming from you and Sarah. I called you two here. I didn't call you, Sarah, and Hagar here. This is how it's going to work. Here's the point. People still look at him. Where's that passage? I think it's over in Hebrews. I can't find it right now. No, in Romans. Look over, hold your place in Genesis chapter 12 and turn over to Romans 4. This whole thing starts out, verse 1, what shall we say then that Abraham our father as pertaining to the flesh hath found? For if Abraham were justified by works, he hath whereof to glory, but not before God. And this whole thing is talking about Abraham and how he believed God and it was imputed him for righteousness. Drop down to verse 12. And the father of circumcision to them who are not of circumcision only, but who also walk in the steps of that faith of our father Abraham. They're walking in the steps of the faith of who? Abraham. Well, we just looked at two very big steps that Abraham did not walk by what? He did not walk by faith. But that's what he's recognized in the Bible, and you keep reading this, and you find out he's given that title. So God, in Romans chapter 4, God could have had Paul bring up Abraham's what? He brings up his faith. He could have also brought up what? His failures. His shortcomings. But he chooses what?
He chooses
not to. Okay? Think of King David. Go over to, you're in Romans, go back to Acts. Acts 13, verse 22. And when he had removed him, he raised up unto them David to be their king, to whom also he gave testimony and said, I have found David, the son of Jesse, a man after mine own what? What do you know about David?
Well, Bathsheba's first thing that comes to mind.
And a whole litany of things that followed, right? But look what God chooses, how God chooses to describe him in Acts chapter 13. How does he choose to describe him? All right. It's apparent these men who were pillars were not perfect. Were far stretched from perfect. As a matter of fact, if they would have done some of these things today in a church setting, they would have been church disciplined. But that's not what God's choosing to focus on. He's choosing to focus on the grace that he bestowed on these gentlemen, and if there's ladies listening, and we could find ladies as well in the Bible, choosing rather to focus on the grace that he bestowed upon them and what they ultimately are recognized for. And I think that's important for men, and I think it's important for every Christian. It's easy to dwell on your failures. You know, sometimes they say the negative is 10 times more powerful than the positive. What do I mean by that? If you had $10 tomorrow morning and you went to work and you got to the lunch line or whatever, and your $10, somehow you lost it. You're checking your pockets, it's not there, you don't know where it went, you lost it. You're going to have a feeling towards that. Say at 4 o'clock you go down for break time and you look on the floor or you look somewhere else, you know that's not your $10, and you find $10. You're going to have a certain what? Feeling. Yeah. That feeling that you had when you found the $10 is going to be 10 times less than the feeling you had when you lost the $10. That's what I'm talking about. See what I mean?
Did you ever read the statistics on if you go to a business and have a good experience or a bad one?
No.
If you go somewhere and to get your car fixed or whatever, somebody comes, puts a furnace in your house, anything, and you think, man, they did a great job. It was a fair price, and you're really happy with what they did. You'll tell 4 people. If they come and you're unhappy, you'll tell like it's almost 50. There's just, there's been study done, so our government probably paid for it. But if you're unhappy, it's amazing how many more people you tell.
Yeah.
You're unsatisfied. It isn't like twice as many. It's like tenfold.
Yes. And actually, the statistics I just quoted came from a study. Why is the news always seem to be bad? Because if it was all good news every night, few people would watch it.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. And it's about keeping you afraid.
Yeah.
They want to say something to scare you, so you tune in again.
Tune in again. My whole point saying it in this context is this. It's easy for a Christian to dwell on their failures, right? Because we all have them. Some are big, some are smaller, the whole gamut. I think it's remarkable and so gracious of God when he could, in the New Testament, focus on the negative and the positive. He chooses not to focus on the negative. And I think we, especially as men, who may have brought some baggage with us into salvation and even through salvation, need to not focus on that. That's not, learn from it, yes. All right? Peter learned, we looked at this last week, what kind of a sign am I? Peter made a huge mistake. Could be another one. And what mistake did he make? God, Jesus, I am not going to deny you tonight. These clowns over here, no way. Yep. 5 hours later, little girl comes up to him somewhere around the early teens. Oh, you've been with Jesus. Response, cuss. Not just say no, cuss. Don't know the guy. Jesus finds him later. Peter, do you love me? Feed my sheep. What a demonstration of grace from God. And Peter, you're a rock, and upon this rock I'm going to what? Build my church. All right? The whole point being that I think, because many of us know the story of Abraham, and maybe we haven't thought of this, there are so many people in the Word of God who had major hiccups. Major hiccups. And God, that's the grace of God and the forgiveness of God and the mercy of God. That's what it's all about right there. That's its demonstration. We live in that.
Wouldn't it be great if we showed it? These things really helped me when I first figured them out because of my youth and the things that I did. I think that's a real snag amongst Christians, how we seem to want to judge one another. More than, these guys, look, church discipline, David got church discipline because, was it Samuel? Mm-hmm. Came to see him and put his finger, you art thou man. And he called him out on it big time. And David repented.
Yep.
And God forgave him. Wouldn't it be great if all Christians treated each other like that? I think the church would have a lot less problems.
Yes. And I think the passage where Jesus said, when the Pharisees said, why are you eating with politicians and sinners? And Jesus said, it's the sick who need a doctor, and those who are forgiven much love much. And I think everybody needs to realize just how much they've been forgiven. And when you realize how much you've been forgiven, how can you look at somebody else and say, well, that can't be forgiven? Yeah, it can. And otherwise, why did Jesus come? And when I realized how much I've been forgiven, and this took time maturing as a Christian to realize how much I have been forgiven, how dare I look at somebody else and think, you can't? Or I should bring it up. I don't want people bringing up my past. I know what it is, and it's hard enough to realize Jesus isn't going to bring it up. I don't need to keep bringing it up. I certainly don't need somebody else bringing it up.
Yeah, the Lord says, as far as the east is to the west,
It's gone.
it's forgotten.
It's forgotten. So I think for men in particular, not to dwell on our past failures, but to look forward to our future successes by the grace of God in our lives, whatever that may be and whatever that looks like. Because I don't think God needs men spinning their wheels. He needs men moving forward. And one way that happens is get detached from your past. I'm glad God doesn't say, and Todd Grover this, and he was this, and this, and this, and this, and this. And no, it's not that. It's Todd Grover this. It's Abraham, not this failure in faith down here. It's Abraham in his success in faith up here. David, Peter, you name it. Being a new creature. Yes, that means a lot. Now,
Do you feel like you need to, any extent, stay mindful of your past, lest you forget where you came from and the grace God showed you?
Yeah.
That you would have a desire to extend it to others? Or do you think you really need to just act like you never did those things? I don't know how to put it, maybe I'm not worried.
I dwell on my susceptibilities. I know there are places I can't go. You could go, but I can't
Understand that.
because I'd be susceptible to participate in something God's delivered me from. It's becoming lesser and lesser as I'm getting older, but I'd be foolish to think it's not there. So I don't dwell so much on the sin as I dwell on what precipitated the sin. I'm susceptible to things, and I can't participate in it. It's not healthy for me. And you mentioned, in the beginning, when we're talking about Abraham getting away from his family, sometimes you have to separate from people that you care about, but may lend to the possibility of you going backwards. So you have to get out of that scenario. And we say, well, you must be awful weak for a pastor. I'm just human and know what my weaknesses are. We're going to learn today in Christ, when he's finished, I won't have any weaknesses. But right now, I have a thing called my flesh that cannot be redeemed. And it's proven to me now for almost 60 years. It's true. It's not redeemed. And it's almost frustrating to the point, come on, 60 years and you're still trying to get me to do that? Yeah. So I don't know if that answered your question or not.
No, I do see, that's a very good way of putting it, actually. Because I think it's something you would have, some people could have a tendency to become, how do I want to put it, holier than thou a little bit. If they act like they never, I'm perfect, I'm forgiven of that, I never did that, I never, and act like you never had any sin in your life when you're talking to other people who may have it a little bit more apparent at that certain time.
Yeah.
Somebody who's slipped, fallen, done something wrong. I think being mindful of those things, your own failures, should be a remindful that you need to be just as forgiving to them as God was to you.
Yeah.
I feel like there's part of me that wants to stay mindful of my failures for the fact that I don't want to dwell on them, but I don't want to forget the grace God showed me.
Absolutely.
I want to make sure I'm extending it to others.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, something would Paul say about asking God to remove the suffering that was something that was going on with him.
The thorn in his flesh.
Thorn that he asked God 3 times.
Yeah.
He said, "My grace is sufficient."
Yep.
That that in your weakness, our actual weaknesses can be used
Oh, yeah.
for something so much greater.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Being that simple, I think of just humbling yourself and being humble and believing God and not trying to figure it all out ourselves. That's probably one of my biggest weaknesses. I've told you before is that I overthink
Yeah.
things, and sometimes I just get too wrapped up.
Too much in the weeds.
Trying to look. Yeah, exactly.
Yep. And maybe you guys have learned this too. It was several years ago. When you see somebody and you think they're doing some peculiar things or anything, they have a story. You're seeing them at a moment in time. They have a whole moment, several moments in time before this. They didn't get to that point just by nothing going on. Something is going on in their life. And if you fail to hear the story, you're apt to prejudge when you don't have information to make those conclusions. And I'll tell you, for me, predominantly over the past years, that I've learned a lot when it comes to this gender and sexual confusion. I have found the majority of people that I know personally, and I only know a handful, maybe 10, when I get to know them and talk to them, there has always been something in their lives. Don't misunderstand, I'm not condoning actions, certain actions that God does not agree with. But I'm trying to say when you hear their story, you understand more, not agreeing, but understand more how they ended up choosing this. And the fact of the matter is, I need to rejoice those circumstances didn't happen in my life. Because who am I to say I would or would not have chosen that? I would hope not. I don't think so. But I didn't go through that either. And therefore, you have a little more compassion to go and tell them about Christ, but you understand. I'm not saying everybody fits that category. I'm just saying in the 10 or so people that I know, they've got some stories. And again, not condoning it, but trying to understand. So, we're out of time, and we got through the first 3 verses of the Abrahamic covenant. But again, if I were to wrap this up, the promises and all that are great. I think the initial thing is God calling you to someplace we don't know, but we trust God that he's going to take us there. The second thing is not dwelling on my failures. Learning from them, understanding them, realizing them, using them in a productive way, but understanding God's not focused on where I've been. God's focused on where I'm going. And I ought to be focused on that as well. Let's close with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for your amazing grace.